I want to conclude by talking about the major barrier to having all students reach the highest area of specialized reading. And that, of course, is access to books. Children of poverty have nearly no access to books. Study after study after study. They have fewer books in the home, fewer books in school, in their school libraries, in their classroom libraries, fewer bookstores in their neighborhood. I'll tell you about our study just because I want to show off. We did a study, me and two of my students, Becky Constantino, Courtney Smith. The way I worked when I was a professor, I had this great formula. They do the work, I get the credit. Worked every time. Anyway, we did this study, they did the work. We looked at 2 areas in Southern California and chose them because they were very different. Beverly Hills, rich and famous, and Watts, poor. We asked the children in various schools, how many books do you have at home that you can read, either your own books or your brothers and sisters' books? Same question of kids in Beverly Hills. Kids in Beverly Hills, 200 books on the average. That's not crazy. That's what I had when I grew up. That's what my children have. That's what my grandchildren have. Watts, 0.4, less than 1. School is not leveling the playing field. School is making things worse. We looked at classroom libraries. The average classroom library in Beverly Hills, 400 bright, shiny books. In Watts, 50. We looked at public libraries. Far away, nothing within walking distance. The children who grow up middle class have thousands of times more access to books. Children in high poverty areas have trouble finding anything. I want to show you on the bottom of the page, I'm going to try to confuse you with statistics here. The last study we did on this, which I think is the most important study I have ever been involved with. My colleagues here, my former students in the 90s, isn't that nice? Still working together. Cian Lee is the chairman of her department now in Taiwan, and Jeff McQuillan is a very successful entrepreneur in Southern California. He runs ESL Pod, which is a wonderful, he's done more good than I could ever do. He advertises free recordings and texts in English for people worldwide who've taken English in school but don't feel competent. And it'll give them more to listen to, more to read. There's lots of selections. It's all free, but if you want to order the transcript, he'll charge you a little bit. He's got so many customers. He and his wife, Lucy, say they're doing fine. I think it's a wonderful idea, a good example of ethical capitalism. Anyway, we did this together. We used data on the Pearls test. Pearls is one of these exams that's given every few years to kids all around the world, in this case 10-year-old kids in over 40 countries. When the test results come out, the newspapers go crazy. They want to see who won. You know, France wants to know if they beat Germany. Korea wants to know if they beat Japan. Alfie Kohn says these test results should be reported in the sports section. That's really where they go. Anyway, we didn't look at that. We did instead an analysis, we call it a multivariate analysis, to see which factors predicted high scores in the countries. The biggest predictor, it says SES, that really means poverty. That was the biggest predictor. The number there, that should say beta, not ADA. What's wrong with me? BETA, sorry, beta. The largest predictor was poverty, 0.41. The more poverty, the lower the scores. And it was highly statistically significant. This is no surprise. You get this in every study all the time. You've been getting it for decades. Everybody knows about it except our governments, okay? They keep saying, don't worry, poverty's not a problem. The kids could make it. No, they can't. You rarely see success in a high poverty environment. Okay, the amount of independent reading done in school, like sustained silent reading, are they given a little time to read on their own, all in first language? This counted, it was positive, did not make significance, but it wasn't bad. Access to a library, a school library of at least 500 books. Positive, significant, nearly as strong as the effect of poverty. I'm going to let that sink in. In other words, poor kids don't read well, largely because they don't have anything to read. You give them stuff to read, their reading looks just like everybody else's. This is consistent with the UK University of London study. It's access to books that count. By the way, we've run a replication of this, and it did not come out quite as strong. Poverty was still the strong predictor. The library was still a strong predictor, not as strong as it was here, but it made up for about 40% of what poverty does, which is pretty good. Finally, instruction, and instruction generally means phonics. Here, this study, the more they did, the worse things got. In our follow-up, it was absolutely flat, neutral. It didn't matter. My suspicion is that a little bit's okay, but there's a point of diminishing returns. You know, after you get past the alphabet, it doesn't do you much good when the rules get so hard nobody can remember them, etc. Using this data, if you look at the bottom, it says r squared equals 0.63. What this means is that looking at this data, we were able to explain about 2/3 of what's going on in test scores. If you know poverty level, whether there's independent reading, if there's a library, if there's instruction, that's 2/3 of the information you need, 0.63% of what you need to predict their scores. In educational research, this is science fiction. You don't get R-squares this high. Our replication, we got a similarly high R-squared. Other studies have too. Children read poorly because they don't have access to books. They're not motivated to read in many cases because they haven't seen lots of good books, okay? Our first step in everything we do is always make sure the books are there. If they tell us, yeah, but the kids won't read anyway, then we're dead. Let's at least try. My conclusion from other studies I've been part of, when the books are there, when they're interesting and comprehensible, students read. I'll close by telling you about a bathroom conversation I had. You want to know what men talk about in the men's room? Here it is. I was giving a seminar, and it was break time. I went to the bathroom. You'd be happy to learn I was washing my hands, and so was this other guy. He said, oh, by the way, I'm a 4th grade teacher, and my kids just won't read. I do sustained silent reading, they don't read. I said, all of them? He says, no, not all of them. I said, well, how many? Oh, about 3. All 3. Well, actually, there's this one kid. I said, does this go on all year? Oh, no, it's just at the beginning. I've looked at these studies. It's not true. Given access to books, kids read. If they're interesting, they don't always call it reading. If you ask kids, do you read a lot, they might say no. Then you ask them their favorite books, they'll tell you. Because the books are not, they don't have the respect for it. Oh, it's just a magazine. Oh, it's just a comic. But just about everyone, when given access to books, will read. Our first priority, make sure the books are there. For children of poverty, it's all about the library. Could you please burst into applause? Okay. All right, and I'll give you what the first question is. Dr. Krashen, where can we find your books? I'm glad you asked, let me tell you. Let me tell you a little more about the website and how things work. Things have changed in publication, okay? And I've reacted to them. I think that academic work should be freely available to everyone. You shouldn't have to be wealthy to read this stuff. So if you look at page 1, I announced this before, there is a website listed, sdkrashen.com. My middle name is David, so as in no David, right? And my articles are there, not all, but we're getting them up every so often. You can download them. You can use them for any reasonable purpose. Don't ask my permission. You may quote them if it's a reasonable quote, like you can quote anything else. So do it. Several of my books are there that are now out of print. Eventually, all of them will be there, okay? I announce new publications and spread the word in 2 ways. Facebook. I'm on Facebook. I use Facebook for research. I discuss what is going on in politics. I discuss educational politics, and I post brief announcements of research I've done or that other people have done. I do the same thing with Twitter. I love Twitter. a link to what's happening, new articles. Sometimes I get a little silly. I got silly yesterday. I don't know, maybe it's just the clean air up here got me involved. And I posted a joke, people didn't think it was a joke, on Facebook about Donald Trump. I just can't help it. I'll tell you what I posted. You can find it on my Facebook page. I said, Donald Trump has announced that when he's president of the United States, and there's an opening on the Supreme Court, the president appoints Supreme Court justice, he's going to appoint himself. Because if he appoints himself, it's only a matter of time before he becomes Chief Justice. And he can do both jobs. He's very good at persuading people. And other people explain to him, and he knows about the art of the deal. So I posted that. It immediately got more likes than anything I have ever posted. And one person said, "You can't make this stuff up." And I wrote and said, "I did." A lot of people thought it was real. In American politics, satire is now obsolete. It's so embarrassing. Okay, those are two really good questions. Anything else?
I have a big problem to learn English. It's about remember the vocabulary, because when I learn Mandarin, there are limit words. No matter what way I remember them, they are limit. But for English vocabulary, they are unlimited, and a lot of words. So, and they are growing every day, I think. So, how to remember those amount of words? Only by reading all the time, or have another simple way?
Me wenti. Okay? You know what I'm going to say.
Yeah,
Read,
no problem.
read, 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 read. Read books that are so interesting, you forget that they're in English. They have to be really interesting. And I have the same trouble with Mandarin. I have tremendous problems because of all the little words here and there. I never know what they're talking about. As I'm reading more, I'm gradually getting more comfortable with it. Let me tell you what we're doing. Have a seat. Let me tell you some things. Okay. I've been I'm a student of beginning Mandarin now. I'm having a lot of fun. It's so much fun being a beginner again. When I try to speak Mandarin, people just stare at me. Then they start laughing, okay? Anyway, there's nothing to read. Very little to read. We did a book in Mandarin I can show some of you. We did a while ago, one storybook, but there's not enough. So I decided we have to create stories, really easy stories. So I've made an organization of about 5 Mandarin teachers all around the world, and the students are writing stories. The teachers correct them. We put them on the internet, and everyone can read them for free. I've written 3 stories already. I'll tell you about them. I wrote one about my sister. Okay, my JJ. I'm the DD, the younger brother. And I said, I will never understand my sister. I wrote that. I wrote a story about Walt Disney. I said, Mickey Mouse and Minnie Mouse, are they married? Are they friends? Are they brother and sister? Donald Duck. Donald Duck has 3 nephews. Where is their mother? Goofy is a dog. Goofy can talk. Pluto is a dog. Pluto cannot talk. What's going on? Now that's in very simple Mandarin, and we're trying to make it easy, interesting, and highly, highly comprehensible. And I think for me, I'm going to have to read that many. I did it in Spanish, and it worked. Spanish is a lot more cognates. When I began with Spanish, I bought 10 grammar translation textbooks, all cheap. I took some out of the library. If you read chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, it gets very hard. You get to chapter 3, you don't know the words anymore. I read chapter 1 of all of them, just the story. Chapter 2 of all of them. By the time I got to chapter 8, I was fine. And most of my languages I keep up through reading stories, reading all the time. I read in other languages every single day, and I always read things that I would never read in English because they're too embarrassing. The word in Spanish is basura. I read junk. I read things that are beneath my dignity, all right? My favorite is science fiction, so I've read science fiction in many different languages. Fortunately, French science fiction, oh my gosh. Oh, there's only one really good author. The rest of them are... Bernard Weber is the only good one after that. So you find something you like. You have to find something you like that you think is fascinating, that nobody else likes, and make it as easy as it can be, and read a lot of it. 1 hour a day for 3 years, remember? You'll go all the way. And you will find yourself saying things, and you didn't know how you learned them. I've been doing this with German. German is my best other language, and I don't know anyone who speaks German. And I'm not going to make friends with someone because they speak German. I've been reading in German. I read in German all the time. I read novels, I read junk. And I'll go to Germany once every 3 or 4 years. I think I'm better each time I come back because I've probably read 30, 40 books in the meantime. That's where it comes from. The oral part, important. But the reading part can really, really help you. Let us know how it works.
I first started to hear about you, my teacher. I've been teaching English for academic purposes in ESL for 10 years now, and my teacher is here too, and he introduced you to me then. But I'm here tonight for my own kids. They're 13 and they're 9, and I have a lot of books all over the house. I'm reading a lot myself. I'm going to change. I'm going to get some comics around. I'm going to get them to Indigo this weekend. And, it's just, as you said, a matter of having the books around. I'm thinking confiscate their iPhones. But what else? Is there anything else that I can do to get them?
I'll answer this on several levels.
Okay.
I am not an enemy of social media,
Okay.
especially Facebook. Think about Facebook. Let's pretend historians discover that in the year 1718, teenagers in southern France had clubs where they would exchange written notes, all about their personal lives. They would write things out, leave them. They'd write letters to each other, even though they lived in the same neighborhood. We would think, wow, what a literate group. That's Facebook. With Facebook, kids are reading and writing more than they ever had in history. And when you're a teenager, only one thing counts, your social life. That's all. You're obsessed with your social life. When your mind is calm, you start thinking about your friends, okay? And why didn't Susie talk to me this morning, okay? Stuff like that. That's what Facebook is about. I think could be a very powerful, positive thing. Reading off the internet also, especially when it's involved with the games. If they're doing Warcraft, there are books about it. There are not just novels, but players' techniques, etc. When my son was doing Dungeons and Dragons back in the old days, didn't do him any harm. He's now a professor of mathematics. I read Dragon Magazine regularly when it came. Interesting conversations, not just about how to play the game, but player strategies, ethical stance of characters. What is the best ethical stance to get through? Really heavy stuff. I asked him how Dungeons and Dragons compared to what he did in school. He said the games are about 10 times as hard. So I would take another look at what they're doing. Number 2, reading always comes from particular interest. If they're interested in skateboarding, biography of Tony Hawk, okay? The area that they're really interested in, that will be the first one. Comic books, let them choose the books. Take them to the comic book store and say, you get $50, take what you want. Try that and leave them alone. Oh yes, a lamp by the bedside.
Right.
And don't let me catch you reading, I want lights out. Ha, they'll be reading.
Okay, great, thank you.
Good evening, Professor Krashen. It's an absolute pleasure to be meeting you. I was first introduced to your work many years ago when I was an ESL teacher back in Iran, Krashen and Terrell Natural Approach. I was part of a project. They were experimenting with that.
I still think it's a good idea.
My question for you is this: the input hypothesis, comprehensible input. I can't testify to its efficacy, but it's the qualifier only that you tend to use when you want to describe its effectiveness, and you also use it tonight as well. Do you see any role for instruction, explicit instruction at all for
Yes.
teaching vocabulary, for grammar,
Okay,
and so forth,
explicit
in
instruction.
addition to I+1?
Good. Good questions. That's a good question. A good question is defined as one I have an answer ready. So this is good. Have a seat. This will take a while. I am not against grammar teaching. I would never say, teach grammar, go to jail. The thing about grammar teaching and memorizing vocabulary is only that it's limited. It's hard. The papers I did back in the 70s, we said there are 3 conditions that must be met if you want to use conscious grammar to edit what you say as a monitor. And the 3 conditions are really hard to meet. Number 1, you got to know the rule. Right away. All the world's greatest linguists asked Chomsky, you know all the rules? He says, no, we're still discovering them. So the great linguists don't know all the rules. The people who write grammar books know fewer rules than the linguists. The best grammar teachers don't know all the rules in the grammar books. The best grammar teachers don't teach all the rules they know. And the best students don't understand all the rules that are taught. And even the ones they understand, they don't remember all the rules. So we're dealing with a very small part of the language. It's hard. So that's number 1. Number 2, if you want to use grammar, you've got to be thinking about grammar. This is very unnatural. It's kind of like patting your head and rubbing your tummy at the same time. Our brains are not designed for us to listen and understand and be worried about grammatical accuracy. It's extremely unnatural. Number 3, you got to have time. There isn't enough time to dredge up these rules. Let's say you are an intermediate student of English, and you have learned, but you haven't acquired the rule for the tag question. John is a boy, isn't he? And you're having a conversation, and you want to use this rule. Okay, it's time to use the rule. John is a boy. Okay. Now, if the sentence has a subject and it's a noun, drop it, use a pronoun. If there's already a pronoun, leave the pronoun. Let's look at the verb. If there's a regular verb, get rid of the verb, use a helping verb. If there's just a helping verb, use a helping verb. If the sentence is positive, make tag negative. If the sentence is negative, make tag positive. Then you change the word order. By the time you do that, your conversational partner is gone. Okay? Now, the only time, there are 2 instances where these 3 conditions are met. Know the rule, have time, be thinking about rules. One is when we give people grammar tests. And studies we did in the 70s, early 80s, that's when people use grammar, when you give them a grammar test. Otherwise, they hardly use it at all. I think highly skilled polyglots use it, okay, but not very much. Let me tell you about my ability to speak French. I'm conversational, I'm okay, but there are late acquired rules of French that I have not acquired that are valued very highly. For example, the rule that says make the past participle agree with the pronoun if it comes before, okay? Like la chose que j'ai prise, all right? That takes monitoring. Now, when I'm speaking French, sometimes I can pull that off because it's only one rule. And I have this huge competence, and it's like a big cloud and a big, heavy piece of steel in it. If there's enough cloud, you can carry it. But we're asking kids to do this, not who are already competent speakers, but it's in their first year. They don't know, they haven't acquired any of it. We're asking them to monitor all of it all the time. So when these top language teachers say, I monitor and it's no problem, they're doing 1 or 2 things here and there. That's all. Okay, that's one place where you can use rules when you do a grammar test. Very hard to use in conversation. Another place is in editing your writing. Let's talk native speakers now. It's an easier example. For those of us who are native speakers of English, there are some places where our version of correct English is slightly different from the regular rule that people say is right, even though we're very well read. My example that works for me is the it's distinction. You know, it is versus possession. My guess is about 2/3 of the educated public have acquired this rule. About 1/3 haven't. I'm in that 1/3. I know the rule. I'm glad I know it because I can get it right. Our standards in written language and punctuation and spelling are 100%. You can't make a mistake or it's lifetime humiliation. You may remember the story of American Vice President Dan Quayle, who made a mistake on, is there an E at the end of potato or not? It could happen to any of us, okay? So that's a place where you can use grammar. It's limited. There aren't too many rules you can do that with, but it's okay. And those are the ones we teach, which is okay to teach in high school. I wouldn't worry about it in elementary school. And basically, I would teach kids how to use a grammar checker. And to be able to use that, you should know a little grammar, what a direct object is, etc. So it's a small part of English language arts. It's not the main performer. Okay?
Hello, Mr. Krashen. And I must say, I used to be a Mandarin teacher in Confucius Institute, and I'm very glad you can learn Mandarin. And it's very hard, I know. And my question today is, you said reading, right? But how can you define read? What's the meaning of read? Because you know that we have different kinds of read. For some people, they read very slow. They read sentence by sentence, word by word, and they get the details. But for someone like me, I read very fast. I just like scan a book. Okay, I can just a glance for maybe 3 lines. But I think the different kind of readings can get different kind of results. For the first one, they can learn, like you said, they can learn words. They can recognize the grammar. They can recognize the structure of the sentence. But for me, my purpose is to get the plot, to know what the story is. But maybe I'm familiar with some kinds of words, but I can't remember it. So I want to know your understanding of reading.
Okay, my limited understanding of reading. For me today is when your focus is on meaning, when you're only aware of the story, you're only aware of the message. That's real reading. And the world disappears around you. And you do remember the story. You don't remember the language, but subconsciously you're acquiring it without realizing it. Oh, I'm going through this now. It's so interesting doing another language. Let me tell you, you're in a whole new world. Because I'm trying to read Hanzi, I'm trying to read characters. Oh my, you cannot memorize them. It doesn't work. It only happens through reading, and the problem is finding texts that are really interesting. I have one with me. I can show it to you later, that my teacher wrote. And I'm gradually getting interested in the story, and some of the characters are becoming slowly more familiar, but it works best if I'm not trying to remember them. I'm not trying to remember. If you're reading along and you come to a new vocabulary word in English or a new phrase, yes, this is great, I'm going to write it down and use it when I talk to my friends tomorrow. You're not reading. The book is not interesting enough. It has to be so interesting, it's all happening subconscious. Good luck.
Do you make a distinction between books and audiobooks?
Audiobooks. I love audiobooks. You know why I love audiobooks? Because I live in Los Angeles. And that means you drive all the time. And I hate driving. My son says driving makes you stupid. That's when I began to appreciate audiobooks. Harry Potter, I did the whole thing on audiobooks. Jim Dale. It was wonderful. I think audiobooks are powerful. Thank you for bringing it up. I think we should be using much more of them. The way we need to use technology is the simplest and the cheapest. We want more audiobooks. We want more stories on the internet. And we want more YouTube videos of funny incidents with simple, comprehensible language. That's what we need. We don't need the fancy stuff they're trying to sell us. But thank you. Yes, that's a big gap, I think. If I could find simple audiobooks in other languages, I'd be very happy. Okay, gang, thank you very much. Thanks for your patience.